And he makes it clear in chapter 27, you're going to testify before Caesar himself. Now, how can an itinerant traveling missionary talking about Jesus of Nazareth from the hick town of Nazareth, how in the world is Paul, who's ostracized from the Jews and the Pharisees, how is he going to get a hearing with the top leader in Rome to talk to him about theology? Well, not going to happen unless something like this happens. And so God takes all of this satanic opposition and rolls it all up into doing something that he wanted to happen at the very beginning in Acts chapter 1. That the gospel go from Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, ends of the earth. How about the power center of Rome? The magnum opus of Paul, writing about salvation, is sent to Rome. He cares about Rome. He wants to get to Rome. And here we have an all-expenses trip paid, right, to get to Rome from the Roman officials. God is working out his plan. And you know what Paul proves to me again and again? And I know what's going on here. The reason he's not focused on complaining. Last week, we looked at the patience he needed. The reason he was able to wait well is because he trusted God and God's plan for his life. We talked about that a lot, but let me just say it one more time. Number 2 on your outline, you need to trust in God and his plans. He's got a plan for your life, and he wants you to trust him, which is the antithesis of what it means to be afraid. And if you're sitting in prison for 2 years, and you have the accusers show up that still are as vehement to kill you as they were 2 years earlier, I think you might be afraid. That's a natural response. Just for me to say you have enemies. You've moved into a very spiritually dangerous place, not by moving in zip code, but by moving from not, I don't follow Christ, to now I'm a follower of Christ. You've just put yourself in the crosshairs of gangs of spiritual, moral criminals and thugs. They're murderers. And I just told you all that the natural response is, wow, that's scary. That's really scary. No. Here's the antidote to that. Trust God, right? And his plan for you. The paradigm is everywhere in the Bible, right? Think about this one. John 14, 1 and 2. 1, 2, and 3. It starts in verse 1. Let not your hearts be troubled. Do not be afraid. Let not your hearts be troubled. Why? You need to trust in God and trust also in me. Believe in God, believe also in me. And then he speaks there after an interval sentence. He says, here, you just need to know. If I go and prepare a place for you, I'm going to come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, you may be also. You got to believe me. If it weren't so, I would have told you. So I know how this is going to end. And what you need to do is to trust me that I'm going to get you there. Now, Paul had a few waypoints on his map, and he knew he was going to make it before Caesar and Rome. And here we see God doing exactly that. And as is often said, it's like God can draw a straight line with a crooked stick, and we look at our lives and it looks really messed up, and left turn here and right turn there and setback there, lost that job, didn't know I was going to have to move there, didn't know this would happen, didn't think that would fall apart. We have all this stuff happen, including your health and your finances, your relationships at work, whatever. And you think, wow, it's a mess. It's not a mess. It's not a mess. Here's what the Bible says, and it's been said by every godly person who understands that God has a good plan that he's working out. It says that surely goodness and mercy are going to chase me down all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. You're not going to heaven to live on a cloud. You're going to come back when he receives you unto himself, and he's going to make his dwelling place among men here on earth. And we're going to have a perfect reality, and you're going to dwell in the house of the Lord, which will be on the new earth forever. He's going to get every Christian there through the path, whether it's cancer or divorce or bankruptcy or whatever it is. He's going to get you there, working out his plan, even though the things that are being thrown at you are satanic. Just like Paul said, this thorn in the flesh is a messenger of Satan sent to buffet my body. He says, I've got a chronic illness. That's Satan. You see that? The bad things in this world, Satan is active. God has let the leash out, and now he's let Satan touch my body. But even in that, we immediately see within the immediate context, God was using that. God had a plan for that. God had a plan to kind of mitigate the fact that he could have a runaway ego and get prideful. It certainly put a muffler on him, and it kept him where he needed to be in terms of humility, and God got his will done. It's almost like Romans 8:28 is true. It's almost like that, right? That God works all things together for good. For those who love God and are called according to his will, you believe that or you don't. And if you believe it, even though you're being attacked, whether it's lawsuits or whatever it is, you've got to know as you're faithful to the Lord to walk with him, he is working out his good plan in you. And you need to say, I'm not going to fear. Turn to this passage, 1 Samuel. This is important. 1 Samuel chapter 17. By the way, before you start telling me these are Christological passages about the greater son of David, I know all that. I know that. But when David kills Goliath, there is a kind of boldness here and a courage to see something the way we ought to see it. And on the authority of 1 Corinthians chapter 10, right? I will say there's a moral lesson for us to learn in this text. I understand the Christological overtones. I get it. I can preach Christ from the Old Testament, just like you. I can do that. But I understand in this passage, there's something about Christian character that we need to learn. I don't mean to be defensive with all that, but let's look at it. That'll just save me a couple emails, I'm sure. All right. 1 Samuel 17. You noticed I didn't laugh along with you when you laughed at that. Look at verse 4. There came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. And if you're really not quick at calculating that in your mind, the app on your phone doesn't translate that for you. Let me just translate that. But that's about 9 plus feet. About 9 feet, perhaps 9 inches. Okay? A lot of people try to roll this down because I haven't seen a 9-foot tall guy, and that seems just freakishly large. It doesn't seem right. Right? But if you really read the rest of this about his armor, you're kind of stuck with the fact that that armor fits a 9-foot tall guy. This is a 9-foot, pushing 10-foot tall guy, and he's not just like, hey, we found a really freakishly large guy in our group. We're just going to send him out there and scare all you guys. He's a champion, and that means that he is an experienced killer. He's a warrior. He's a soldier, and he's giant. Right? That's what's going on here. Well, you know what happens. David shows up, bringing supplies to his brothers. He's just a shepherd boy. But he gets here, he hears what's going on, and he listens to the Philistines mocking God. His zeal for the Lord, he is absolutely, completely just astonished that no one's doing anything about this. Because the Philistines are calling out, send your best guy over from Israel and fight him in this valley. So there's a standoff. And David is sitting there getting angry with indignant anger because here's someone slandering God. That's called lies. There's a lie. This is satanic. And he goes, this has got to stop. Drop down to verse 32. Just remember, this is a ruddy little young shepherd boy. David says to Saul, Saul's wearing the crown. He's in some special tent with soldiers sitting outside of it, away from the front line, but he's there in the battle. He's the top-ranking military official, and the shepherd boy says to the top-ranking military official, let no man's heart fail because of this guy, this big guy. Your servant will go and fight this Philistine. That is, gumption, man. Wow. You're going to, what? You've been at a standoff and you've got no one that's willing to fight. The hearts are, quote unquote, melting before the Philistines. And you're walking in with that kind of boldness? Crazy. And so what does Saul say? It says what we would say. What are you talking about? You're not able to go up against this Philistine to fight him. Verse 33, you're just a teenager. You're just a youth. And this man has been a man of war from his youth. Come on, you can't do this. And David said to Saul, hey, your servant, speaking of himself, I used to keep sheep for my father. Right? When there came a lion and a bear, it took a lamb from the flock. I went after him. I struck him. I delivered him out of its mouth. And if he rose against me, I caught him by his beard, and I struck him and I killed him. Your servant, David, I have struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God. And David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. I just think, here is this lie. Here is this liar. Here's this blasphemer. And David, with great courage, looks at the battles and troubles that God has got him through in the past and says, you know what, this problem, this enemy of the people of God, this defier and one who's mocking the armies of the living God, I'll lean into this. And talk about lean into it. Drop down to where this starts in verse 48. When the Philistine arose, verse 48, and came and drew to meet David. David took 3 steps back and counted his rocks. No, David did what? Verse 48, he ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. Just love that. Talk about a guy that's bold and zealous for what's true and what's right and what's real, because you know what? You don't blaspheme God because that is not right. That's not true. The true and living God should be worshiped. You should ascribe to the Lord the glory that's due his name, and you're mocking him and defying him. And David sees this, and he leans into it. Some of you have been diagnosed with cancer. Some of you have chronic illnesses. Some of you are going through divorce. Some of you are being sued. I'm just telling you this, right? Whatever Satan's throwing at you right now, no, Satan's on a leash. You need to lean into that. Because whatever God has done to get you through the past, he's going to get you through this. One way or another, even if it's like Paul, as we said last time in 2 Timothy chapter 4, even if it means your head's going to be lopped off, and this is going to end your life, the Bible says he'll bring you safely into his kingdom. Right? You're going to live in the house of the Lord forever. That you can walk through the valley of the shadow of death and fear no evil because he's with you. You don't fear because you trust God, and God draws near. That's why I'm taking you to that great psalm in your small groups, in Psalm 59, to remember that God is a God who's got your enemies in his crosshairs. And right now, it seems like they're winning. But you've got to remember what that old hymn that I've already quoted, John Newton wrote in 1779, through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace, not because you're some big warrior, but his grace has brought me safe thus far. I've killed the lion and the bear, and his grace will lead me home, whatever the last battle is that you have to fight. I love this next verse. It's not sung very often, but listen. The Lord has promised good to me. His word my hope secures. He will my shield and portion be as long as life endures. God is going to get you through whatever Satan's throwing at you right now. You need to trust in God and his plans, and that means there's no fear. Paul, speaking of what he does here, which is very wise in verses 8 through 11, go back to our passage in Acts 25, he's going to give a defense, and he gives a wise defense. He gives a wise defense that understands something about it would be good for me to ask to appeal to Caesar. Because if I don't, I know how hostile these Jews are. They might kill me the minute I pack up my stuff and get my personals back and I walk out of this prison in Caesarea. I might get killed. Not only that, I know that God says he's going to ultimately get me to Rome. Well, this will be an all-expenses-paid trip to Rome. I can go to Rome if Festus just tells me I can. So he's going to end up with a request to appeal to Caesar. And not only that, he argues, in essence, the totality of his innocence, and then he states his own integrity. Look at verse 8. Neither against the law of the Jews, because they were concerned he was teaching something that was not biblical. And he's saying everything in the Bible, just like we saw in Luke 24 in our daily Bible reading, Jesus was speaking about the truth of him being the Messiah from the law and the prophets and the Psalms. He was saying exactly what the Bible says. And Paul's doing the same thing. Jesus of Nazareth is the Messiah. Secondly, I didn't do anything against the temple. They said I brought a Gentile into the court of the Jews. I didn't. And from the very beginning, this was a misunderstanding. And we saw that. And Paul defended himself and tried to exonerate himself from the beginning. But he said, I didn't do it. No one can say it. They've trumped up charges against me. And lastly, they're saying I'm a troublemaker, stirring up trouble before Rome. Hey, I haven't done anything against Caesar. I haven't been a bad citizen. I paid my taxes. I've done what I should. I've committed no offense here. I'm innocent. And then look at what he says in verse 11. If I'm a wrongdoer, whatever you can bring up, if I've done something wrong, I'll pay the penalty, whatever that is. Right? I am a man here of integrity, standing up for the truth. I haven't done wrong, false charges. Listen, just send me to Caesar. It's a pretty wise response, all things considered. If we had time, we could look at every facet of what's going on in this whole movement of history early in the church, and you can see this is exactly what God wanted to have happen.